Committee in connection with the Liberty Partnership Project is pleased to present, as part of our Black History Month activity, an author appearance by JJR Ramey, who is the author of West of Paradise Run. Mr. Ramey.
Thank you, everyone. How you doing? Okay. First of all, I'd like to say a little bit about myself, what I've done in the years I've been working in broadcasting. Started out as a disc jockey in Tennessee and moved on to Florida. I worked in Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, Colorado, and worked at many stations here in New York City as a DJ, and then I eventually moved into news. Some of you may have seen me on Channel 9 doing news on Channel 9 or either Channel 5. No? Well, in any case, I was a reporter. One person has seen me. I chose the field of broadcasting because I wanted to reach out to people. It's very difficult for people who think a lot like myself, and I'm sure you think a lot as well. It's very difficult to voice your opinion, to say things that you really want to say, the way you want to say them. There's always someone trying to get in your way, trying to tell you what to say or tell you what to do. And I've always been a person against that. I like to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And so, in order to achieve that, I had to find some way in order to voice my opinion. And one way to do that was to be a broadcaster. At first I got into the DJ business, and I assumed it was going to be a lot of money and a lot of fame and glory. However, it didn't work out that way. I started out $50 a week, which wasn't too long ago. And then eventually I raised my salary, was able to move on and do other things and to get into news. I've been a radio street reporter, a TV street reporter, and all of it has helped contribute to my writing career. And although I've been writing since I was 9 years old, I really never thought I would have a career in writing. It was something that I just did because I had a lot of things to say, a lot of things that I thought about. Writing was something that I thought the other guy did, the other person did, because it took a lot of work, a lot of research, and I just never thought I had the capacity or the brains to write a book. But I found out differently once I kept putting my words and ideas into motion on paper and on radio and television. I found that I could do it. So this was not a chosen field for me. Actually, I really just started writing my books, I guess about 6 years ago. So far, I've written 8 books. This book, West of Paradise Run, is my first novel to be published. And it's making history. I had no idea that it would make history when I first started writing the book. But no one has ever written a black Western novel that's been distributed amongst the people nationwide. This is the first time that any book like this has been written and published by a major publisher. The publisher of the book was Random House, which you may have heard of, Ballantine Books. And I found that there's been a lot of interest in the book because black men are not normally seen in a good light. If you notice in TV, one of the reasons I didn't like TV too well is because you always see blacks on the screen, especially black men in handcuffs and that type of thing. We know that black men are not always in handcuffs. We know that we do some great things for the world. We've always done great things. We're inventors, we're writers, we're performers, we're actors, and there are a lot of things that we do that should be portrayed. This book, West of Paradise Run, actually came to me. My agent had suggested that I look into a historical book to write. I knew very little about history. I don't know, any of you history majors? Any of you interested in history? Nobody? Well, I was the same way. 5 years ago, I was the same way. I had no idea what was really going on in history. I knew that I knew about Abraham Lincoln. I knew he was a president, and I knew there was a Civil War, and I knew there were soldiers in the Civil War. But I had no idea, actually 6 years ago, that there were really black soldiers who fought for our country. Anytime. You have a question?
Yeah, how much did they give you for making this book?
How much did they give me?
Yeah.
Well, they gave me up front, they gave me a fee of $3,500. But it took them 2 years to get me that $3,500. They would send me a little bit at a time. So, you know, you always think about working and making money, or you think that it may be a glamorous business. It is glamorous, but you've got to get your book out there, you've got to get your money.
Hold on, so what was your final fee?
Final fee?
Yeah.
$3,500 is what I got up front. Now, what I will get also are royalties to the book. Once all of you go out and buy my book, well, then I will get a piece of that about 2 years from now. Okay, but it's only a small percentage. It's not a large percentage in any way. Of course, when all of you go out and buy the book, and then when I make the movie, and of course, that's when you really make the money. So I'd like to get on with it.
Make a movie?
Yes, sir.
I want to be in it. I want to be in it.
Can you act?
Everybody.
How many are actors? How many can act?
I'm a producer.
Producer? Okay, I can use you, producer. Actor? Okay, who would like to do a scene for me?
Yo, me.
Well, okay, I tell you what, let me read some of the book for you. I have some excerpts picked out, and then we'll talk a little bit later. I'll field your questions. Okay? I'm going to begin with the prologue of the book. The prologue of the book explains what the book is about, what we're going to be talking about. Now, this is, you have to realize that in writing a book about black soldiers in the Civil War, that this has nothing to do with modern times. This war, the Civil War, happened in 1865, between the years 1861 and 1865. So we're looking way back to a time when I can't remember, and of course, none of us can remember. But this is the history that we need to know. This is the history that will help us to be ourselves, to move on in the world. I'm going to begin with the prologue of West of Paradise Run. During the years 1861 to 1865, the North battled the South during the Civil War, the bloodiest clash in U.S. history. The war that would determine if the states that had seceded from the Union would become a separate nation bound by slavery, or if the slave would become a free man. The Civil War marked the first time in American history that men of African heritage were engaged in extensive combat service. On July 17, 1862, the U.S. War Department created the Bureau of Colored Troops to handle Negro enlistment. In Louisiana in 1862, General Nathaniel P. Banks formed Corps d'Afrique, a Negro Army unit, and blacks paid $10 a month, signed up by the thousands to defend their nation that their kinfolks had built with blood, tears, and thankless oppression. Negro soldiers saw the war as a chance to plot their hopeless destinies. These black men in blue were brave under siege in several major battles: Point Lookout in Virginia, Fort Pillow in Tennessee, and Milliken's Bend in Louisiana. Almost 200,000 black men had fought for the North by the time the war had ended. On March 1st, 1865, by order of Brigadier General Hollingsworth Williams, U.S. Army soldier scout Sergeant Jonathan Frederick Shelby, a Yankee by circumstance as well as motive, headed north out of New Orleans, then west on a vital intelligence mission along the Red River into northeastern Texas. His destination, Red River Station. Should the war move west toward Rio Grande, the Union would be ready, and John Shelby would lead the way. But Shelby found trouble where the desperadoes roamed, in the lawless land of Texas, a land where rattlers and roughnecks reigned supreme, a land where dying was cheaper than living. Sergeant Shelby dreamed of one day soon becoming a cowboy and of running cattle from towns like Dodge City and Ogallala by way of the Texas Trail. One day he knew he would find the land of his dreams once the war was done and the people were totally free. But first he had some fighting to do. This is the beginning of chapter 1. The crackling dry sagebrush weaved and rolled atop the skin of the dusty soil. The wind swirled along the plains and plateaus in the wild expanse of a land called Texas. The sun shone bright along the rim of the golden horizon. Vultures, their two-tone blackish wings spread 6 feet or more, hovered dangerously across the land. These indiscriminate birds of prey would fill their bellies with the flesh of lesser varmints, and ofttimes man. While blood congealed upon their pointed beaks, their red heads glistened in the late wintertime light. 2 strangers were headed west, and since their mission had begun, each day had been long, too long in fact. But by now the leader and his pal had gotten used to the relentless cycle of hot, dry days and slow, uneventful nights. It was March of 1865, and the war between the states had yet to be won by either side. This brother against brother war had begun in 1861, when Confederate regulars fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Since then, life had grown harder than either the North or the South had ever expected. It was especially difficult for the Southern gentleman, the Southern white gentleman, who had built his fortune on the blood and toil of African slaves in the land where cotton was king. No Southerner ever dreamed God's good fortune would end, but the men of the industrial North, the Yankees, knew that in a pinch, that the South would have no chance to defeat their ranks in battle. And they prided themselves on having drawn the Southern states into a war that was destined to change the status quo in their favor for a long time to come. The rumble of distant rebel cannon fire still echoed within the stranger's mind, yet they were too far west inside of Texas to really hear the guns that took their toll on lives in nearby Louisiana. It was easier for an ordinary man who could lay down the burden of thought for a few moments and pick up the load again when he saw fit. But for the fighting men of the Union and the Confederacy, the war was a never-ending trauma, a once glorious dream become all too bloody and real for men who had been mama's boys not too long before. The pair of Union fighting men rode slowly toward a place that they had located on their primitive map, the once lawless town of killers and thieves, a place called Clarksville, Texas. The stranger in charge was one Union soldier scout, Sergeant Jonathan Frederick Shelby. He had accepted the mission to map and peruse the land that lay between New Orleans and Red River Station, Texas. His run from southern Louisiana should have been a practical straight shot north and then west, but his order had taken him off track for a brief stop in Natchitoches. But that was all part of the job, and he was proud of the Union blue uniform resting upon his back. This man was dark-skinned, a Negro, a black, an African, and so was his partner, and that made all the difference in the world. In 1865, men of color were not supposed to lead, certainly not wear the white man's blue, not ever in a world where he was an outcast, thought to be what he had never been, inferior at every given level. This is the beginning of chapter 3. John Shelby's partner has been killed by a gang of men led by a man named Willie Samples. At the present time, the black soldiers hiding in the bushes waiting to capture the men who had killed his pal. The blistery hot, sultry sun dropped fast toward the edge of the world. The last few rays of golden light bounced boldly off the mighty Red River. The bullets sang dangerously through the trees, destined to kill. The ornery, menacing words of Willie Samples accompanied the whining voice of the bullets as they rang through from the darkening thicket. Hot lead from his Henry .44 rifle flew fast between his words. Might as well give up, fella. Ain't but one of you and a whole bunch of us. You think you hunting us, but we's hunting you. Ain't but one of you and a whole bunch of us. We know where you are, and we'll come in and get you. All we want is some victuals, some food, and that pack house of yours. We'll have to take your shooting irons, of course, on general principle, you understand. Willie snickered and continued his yapping as the juice from a wad of tobacco oozed down the corners of his stinking mouth. I just might let you live if you act right, said Willie. I hate to shoot a man before I see his face. I like to know who I'm killing. Know what I mean? So you best come on out, boy, before I use my patience directly. John looked around him in a full circle and then gazed into the heavens in search of strength and God's help. In the year 1865, a black man needed all the help he could get from anywhere he could get it. And Jonathan Shelby needed help right now from any source. Shelby was one of the best scouts ever born. He didn't know it, but that was a fact. And he had often been called the best darn scout under pressure in Civil War Louisiana. He tried to keep up with the white man's side of the issues of the day. By lifetime association, he made certain that he understood the black point of view. He often grew weary, even angry at times, when he felt his fellow Negroes paid too much attention to complaining and wasting time, rather than studying the enemy and his tactics for personal and community gain. It was John's curiosity that made him both a good scout and a good human being. The black man was also honored that his middle name was that of Frederick Douglass himself. He wondered if 100 years from now that black folks would remember names like Abraham Lincoln, the author of the Emancipation Proclamation, and Dangerfield Newby, who fought liberation of the slaves. He wondered if they would remember Harper's Ferry in 1859, where John Brown met his match with federal and government troops, hung by the neck for what he believed in. John had always admired great men, and he felt in his own way he was standing up for what he believed in. He would die if he had to, like John Brown, fighting for the cause of freedom. By now, John had lost all patience with these men. He could take a lot of pushing, John Shelby could, but when he finally got riled, he'd unleashed a driving fury that no one could stop. He had never really liked guns. Guns often made cowards look like men. He preferred hand-to-hand combat, where the winner could walk away satisfied and the loser could walk away alive. But as the bullets whizzed by his head, John assumed that since Texas land was such as it was, there was no walking away for both sides. Sometimes the good man won. Sometimes the good man got killed. In the town of Clarksville, Texas, John Shelby meets a young African-American woman named Zena Beale. In this scene, they talk of the future of black folks in the United States of America. This is Zena Beale talking first. "What's going to happen after the war, Johnny?" Zena said. "Can't rightly say," said John. "One thing I do know is that the black man's got a long way to go before he can truly be free. Abraham Lincoln's talking about sending colored folks back to Africa and maybe even to South America somewheres. I never even thought about going to no Africa," said Zena, "let alone Texas land." "You gonna let them send you away?" "Nope," said John. Zena talks about her brother, about how she wants to set him free. She needs to raise the money in order to set him free from their white masters. Zena thought about John's earlier words, about the will to see Santee free, about Negroes being sent back to Africa, and since she believed his every word, she was scared. "How they gonna send us back to Africa, John?" she said. "Seems to me that if they's gonna send us back somewhere, then we'd have had to been there before. Our folk ain't never been out of Texas. Ain't no way they could go to no Africa. This is the only place they know. And anyways, I don't even know which way Africa is. I really don't." Tears rose in Zena's eyes, and she turned her head away from the black man in near despair. "I know it don't make no sense," said John, gently turning Zena's head toward him, looking deep into her pretty eyes. They were gray when he'd first met her in the lounge, but now they were a pale brown color and had the intensity of a deadly, serious black woman. That's all I'd like to read for you. Are there any questions about what I've just read to you?
No, it was
Yes.
you acquire some information so that you can be able to write that.
Well, I had to do a lot of research in the library. This information has been left out of our history, left out of our black history for many years. And I had to go to the Schaumburg Library, the New York Public Library. I had to send off for books many different places. I frequented a store called the Liberation Bookstore. It was very difficult to find information like this because this is information that the whites have tried to keep away from us for so many years. And I had to dig very deep in order to find this information. In fact, I could guess $1,500 to $2,000 worth of books myself that now I have in my library. Yes?
How old is the character?
He's 22 years old.
How long did you get it right?
Well, it took me altogether about 2.5 years to write the book, mainly because, like I told you before, I knew very little about history, because in school, when we came to history class, I, in essence, closed my ears. I had no interest in history when I was in school. So, therefore, when I started doing the research on the book, I had to really start from scratch. I had to start off with basic high school books in order to learn what was said about our history, and then I had to keep moving on. And each book that I looked in, I found more information. I would buy a book, I would find maybe one chapter in that whole book that helped me to write the book, to do the research. In another book I might find a paragraph. In another book I might find one line. But I had to do a lot of research, a lot of reading. And at the time I was doing the book, I was working a full-time job. I was working 7 p.m. till midnight every night, so I'd get home about 1 in the morning and cool out for a minute, and then about 2 o'clock I would start reading and doing my writing. I'm also not a typist. That's one thing I didn't take in school, was typing. And because I was the guy, everybody in my school, my high school, took typing except me. And I was the guy that would never need typing. I knew I would never need typing, so I didn't take one single day of typing. But then, as soon as I got out of high school and college, suddenly I realized that I had to know how to type. So that's one course that was great, that would have been great for me to take, but I didn't take it. So that's two courses, typing and history. Subjects, information that I never thought I would need, that suddenly I did need it. Any more questions?
How did you like separate it from fact? How did you know like what was fact and what was fiction? Because is everything that you wrote, is it exactly the way exactly the way it happened? Is it true?
No, this is it's what I call historical fiction. Much of the information that you hear me talk about is fact. However, the story is fiction. The story is made up. Jonathan Frederick Shelby never existed as far as I know. It was made up by me. What I did was I attempted to...
What I'm saying is not the actual character, but what he went through.
What he went through? Well, that was actually made up. After doing the research and determining what went on in 1865, I had to kind of make up the character and make him fall into the situation that would make it real and make it right. Because I read about a lot of other characters along the way, and some of the same things that John Shelby went through were some things that other real people went through. I mentioned in the prologue of the book when I first started reading a Negro regiment, a Negro battalion called Corps d'Afrique. Corps d'Afrique was real. That was one of the first battalions that accepted black men into the Union Army. It was a very difficult time. As soon as the war broke out in 1861, there was a move by black men, by the hundreds and thousands who wanted to join up. But there was so much racism and prejudice at the time, they didn't want the black soldiers to join up. So what they had to do, what the black soldiers had to do was to sit by and just watch the war go by. However, eventually, the whites decided that it would be, that if there were blacks out fighting, that if the blacks were out alongside the white men fighting the war, that maybe the black men would catch some of the bullets that might ultimately kill some of the white men. So they decided to let the blacks go out there and get shot just like the white men were getting shot. And some of the white soldiers were even more intelligent. They figured that if they were fighting a war that would lead to the black's freedom, then why not let the black fight for his own freedom? So that's how it actually came about. Yes?
Why did you choose that title?
Well, it kind of came to me. Actually, this is book one in a series of 6 books. There are 5 more books in this series. Book 2 will come out, I would guess, about another 6 or 8 months. So this is a story where you find a black man who's searching for his dream. It's kind of like Martin Luther King and searching for his dream. Martin Luther King's dream was, in essence, our dream. John Shelby's dream was the dream that many black people felt in those days, but not a lot of blacks could actually go out and fight for their own freedom, because it was a totally different situation now. Many people today think that we just all of a sudden had our freedom and had our civil rights, but we didn't. As long ago as 35 or 40 years, there were a lot of things we couldn't do. We couldn't drink at fountains with white people. There were fountains that were that had colored over the fountains, and then there were other fountains that had white over it. So there were lots of things that we couldn't really do. So John's dream was to find a place that he called Paradise Run. And that was to be the place where he would move, he would bring his family, he would bring as many people in, and he wasn't prejudiced. He wanted people, all kinds of people, to live in his town, his community of Paradise Run, because it's important to get a balance. You can't live in a vacuum in this world. It's very difficult to just live solely in a black community or live in just a white community. He wanted people to live together, Indians, Mexicans, whites, blacks. He wanted them to live together in harmony. And this was the town, Paradise Run. And it was kind of like a code to John. It was like he was going west, moving west, but at the same time he was searching for his Paradise Run. Any more questions? No one? How many of you like to write?
I like you right now. You said a series was 6?
Series of 6. Huh?
Yeah, it took you 2.5 years to write this book?
It took me that long to write this book because I didn't know anything about history. I had to start from scratch learning history. So that's why it took me so long. The other book, the second book, I've already finished. I finished that about a year and a half ago. And it took me maybe 3 or 4 months to do it because I'd actually done all my basic research. And you'll find that if you don't know anything about a subject, or if you know very little about a subject, the best thing to do is to go to your library and ask questions. You've got to seek out that information from people who know, teachers who know. And you'll find that teachers don't know everything. You'll find that the library doesn't have everything you need. You have to search for many different sources. And I think what really got me interested in this subject was because it was a black man doing this. You know, most of the Westerns that you see, or at least I would say all of the Westerns that you see, may have black characters, but the characters are not the hero of the story. They're not the lead character. You oftentimes see many of the movies today. You'll have a white character, then you'll have a black character. But the white character seems to get the better role, and the black character is like standing behind him. There's a lot of ways that, a lot of psychological ways that things are put upon us in this world. For instance, I'm sure there was a movie called Lethal Weapon. And you remember Danny Glover? You've heard of Danny Glover, right? Yes. Okay. If you notice, it's something you may not notice, but I'm going to point it out to you, and as you see posters and so forth and photographs and pictures, I want you to take note of this, that...
the headline, Mel Gibson and Danny Glover.
Exactly. Now, why was it like that? Why couldn't it have been Danny Glover and Mel Gibson? But that's a psychological thing that this country has put upon us that we have to kind of break down. For a black man to be in the photo here, to be up front, is something that's major. My publisher is probably the biggest publisher in the world, Random House. And I have not seen any book that had a black man, fiction book, a novel, where the black man is up front. You see here, the black man is up front, the white men are in the background. Now that has nothing to do with me wanting to be racist, it's just that this is the story of a black man. It's not a story of a black man told by a white. So it's like this is history making in many ways. And as I begin to negotiate the rights for the film and so forth, and once the film comes out, I hope that you will get the book and you'll be able to read it. And there's a lot of things in there that I think you can relate to today. And I think that's what a book has to do. A novel, one great author had said, probably gives you a better sample of our lifetime of history than a nonfiction book, because a nonfiction book is like your history books, your school books, your textbooks. They tell facts, and they can't really move away from the facts. But this book, of course, is historical fiction, and it tells a wonderful story of a black man who's trying to fight for his freedom.
Also, during as far as recruiting, just before the emancipation, I think it was 1864, you had Frederick Douglass that approached his first visit to the White House with Lincoln to get the black troops involved in that Civil War.
Right.
It was one of the part of history that speaks of it here, but then again, it's one that you have to basically do your research and know a little bit about yourself as a part of American history. Like we spoke of earlier today, African American history.
Exactly. Any more questions? How many of you like Westerns? You like Western movies?
Can I ask you a question?
Like Bonanza.
Sure.
I said, do you feel that you could have wrote this better than such as someone like another author, like say for instance Sidney Sheldon, if he would have picked this to write? Do you feel that because you're black and I guess you will understand what he was going through? Do you feel that you were able to write this book better than any other person could do?
Oh, definitely. It would be very difficult for me to write the story of a white soldier in the Civil War because I wouldn't know what he's thinking. But I can pretty much gather in my struggles, in my fights, with whatever it is I'm fighting for in my career, I can pretty much guess what the character was feeling because I'm a black man as well.
Well, wouldn't it seem like say for instance, if it was about a white character and you came in touch with that white character better than basically probably another white man would have, then would you think that you would receive more recognition for that?
Well, it's not really important. The recognition is not really important. The whole idea is to tell a good story, a good truthful story. You know, I know what you're saying. If I was a Sidney Sheldon or
I'm not comparing you to Sidney Sheldon.
okay.
What I'm saying is that do you feel as a black author, as an author, right, that you would have been able to write that story better since you did create it better than, say, perhaps Sidney Sheldon?
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's what I'm asking. Because to me, there's no such thing as a black author or a white author. If you're an author, you're an author.
Exactly.
It's just stereotyped as your color.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that society has put upon us too. You know, there's really no difference. We all are made up of the same flesh and bone and skin, but society has tried to make it seem like that we're different, that whites and blacks are different, and that's just not the case. Mexicans and Indians, like they always call the Indians red men. Indians weren't red men. They were actually, and they weren't Indians. They were Native Americans. And that's something important that we have to realize, that whites were not the first here, blacks were not the first here, but the native Indians first here.
And just the idea of use of that syllable, Indians, I mean, that's the Europeans' way of being very derogatory and saying a culture of people are primitive. And you cannot apply that so-called Indian to every culture of people. That's why I think I did mention to you, when you talk about the indigenous Native Americans in this country, you just say Native Americans.
So why is it labeled as Negroids, Caucasoids, and Eastern, like middle, you know, what's the third term? The third race?
Like Asians and Europeans.
No, I'm saying it's classified as three races. Negroids, Caucasoids, and what else?
Azoids.
Mongoloids and Mongoloids.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, that's European. That's the European's way of actually placing himself above any other people. Where if you understand it, you just read and research your own history, which is basics for you, you find now that he just stepped on the stage of Life and Humanity. And it was all laid out for him, pre-laid out for him by Africans, like we did this afternoon.
But what I'm saying is, like you said, Indian is a race.
Well, okay, that's a syllable that's used by Europeans to describe the people.
It's easier if I said Native American to you, you might not know I was talking about the American Indian. So, well, okay, you know, but many people don't know. And I'm one of the people, you know, 6 years ago, I really didn't distinguish that much between a Native American and an Indian. So, I mean, it's a learning process where you learn that a lot of the things that you read in books are not exactly the full truth. You know, it's true many times in the history books, but there's more that could be said. Like when I was coming along in high school and in grammar school and high school, basically all I saw about us blacks was the slaves. You know, it would mention a story about Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, all kinds of different stories about white men, but when they mentioned black people, it was always slaves, and we were much more than that.
When you were growing up, it was never stated that in Egypt, when there was black pharaohs and, you know, however that it was classified back then, that there was white slaves?
Oh, well, so that's been documented. A lot of things have been documented, but it's not given to us. You know, these are things you have to go to the library or whatever and research for yourself. No one's going to come out and hand you a book at your school and say, here's the true history of the world. What they're probably going to do is give you a history book, and you'll have to try to read between the lines. There may be a lot of information, and you may think it's wrong, but you still have to do your research in order to find these things about Egypt and so forth.
You'll also find out that the first Negro was a white man if you begin to understand and research your history. The first Negro was a white man. The first Negro was a white man. We talk about the first of the beings that came from the caves of Europe, Southern Europe, and they were considered Negroes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention, and good luck to you in the future. If I can help in any way, let me know.
How you doing? Ain't trying to fix that one.
Throw it away.